It's hard to sit in the church and seeing everyone talk about prosperity, talk about God's blessings, how God's blessed them, and thank God for their blessings. And as an Indigenous person, you know their blessings came at the cost of Indigenous lives. You know, the history of genocide, and there's racism within the church too, and there's all that stratification within the church itself. You know, you can have all this language. Oh, we're family, and we're sit together and have a meal, right? But we're not alike.
Yeah.
We don't
Right.
have nothing
Yeah.
in common,
Yeah.
even though we do. But this exterior culture of appearance, and income wealth, throws up so many barriers for people.
And in a predominantly Christian society, systemic as well as individual-based racism reveals a mindset of entitlement that is proportionate to today's gross economic inequalities. In light of this, one is left to wonder if Christianity is more enamored with imperial aspirations than the mere winning of souls for Christ. Along with a lifetime of lived experience, I've been working around racism, anti-racism, and other social and environmental justice issues going on 7 years. And in these working circles, we endeavor to create safe spaces so folks can feel open to sharing without fear of judgment. However, I've also found that in creating all these safe spaces, we've also created an atmosphere where we are barely able to get to and break past the hard stuff. And in a culture of accessibility in our discourses, innovative solutions to complex problems are hard to come by. Thereby, society rarely moves beyond what it is accustomed.
It's really hard to sit there and see all these people in the church putting on airs, being all holy and all that, and then you see their other behaviors, right, that are not very Christ-like.
So, John, let me just ask you straight. Do you think the church is part of colonial racism?
Well, you take a look at the doctrine of discovery in it, right there in itself, even though it doesn't mention racism, but it's implied, of the othering, right? So most definitely, I mean, to take the land from savages, that's racism there, right there, right? In the church today, if you're not taking part of trying to return the land which was stolen through the doctrine of discovery, if you're not actively engaged of repenting from that history, well, then most definitely you are, the church, whoever, definitely is a part of upholding that system of land theft, resource theft, and all of it, right? The economy. You just taking part in the economy is taking part in racism, because the whole system is based upon the unlawful appropriation of everything the indigenous people worked centuries taken care of.
Just that colonial governing and judicial bodies refuse to take any serious moral account of their place in history, because doing so would mean acknowledging that their patriotic legitimacy lies entirely in a religious doctrine of racism, theft, and genocide. And to turn the tables on misconceived notions towards the noble savage with paganism, we have Christianity's own mythical practice of claiming foreign lands and resources simply by reciting a few words from the deck of a ship, or planting their flags and symbols upon our soil. So likewise, the branding of trees and sandstone cliffs, as Meriwether Lewis did during the famed Lewis and Clark expedition of 1803 to 1806, all of which are still entrenched as the legal Euro-Christianized foundation of appropriation within your courts. Today, we see this delusion of ownership play out in the building of America's border wall, keeping indigenous people out of their own territories. Boundaries only reflect fear, and fear restricts movement not only of the physical, but movement in the spiritual as well. Such boundaries cause an inability for our society to flourish in a good way, to nurture and be nurtured. And so it is with reconciliation. How are we to come together and heal as a global community when the dominant power structures refuse to relinquish positions of privilege and pride through ill-gotten achievements? In other words, if there is no repentance, how can there be forgiveness?
A lot of times the church sees the indigenous peoples and Canada as a problem. But what can the church learn from Indigenous peoples?
They can relearn how to connect with the earth, how to have a relationship with the wildlife and with the flora and fauna, right? They can go back and remember what happened in the Garden of Eden, right? There's one aspect about the Garden of Eden that the church is missing out on, and that's what's the lesson behind the apple. Eve taking the apple, right? Why were they kicked out of the Garden of Eden? Because they couldn't practice restraint. They didn't practice restraint. They were told not to eat of that apple, but they ate of the apple.
Yeah.
And you take a look, and they were told man and woman was created to be with God in the garden and steward the garden together. And the man was given command to steward the garden, right? And now look at our society and our ecosystem where we are today. Canada makes up about 70%. Is 70% Christian. That was the census in 2011. That 70% Canadians are Christian, right? And so they have a large influence of what happens in this country. What's played out in the Garden of Eden is playing out now, from what I see now, right? It's playing out right now. Is that Christians, Canadians, they're not practicing restraint, in our consumerist economy, and that's what Indigenous culture is about good stewardship and not taking too much, not taking more than you need from the land, right? And so they can make that connection.
What can the church do to take part in reconciliation?
Start working to undo all these systems that are designed to take right from the land. All our comforts are bringing us to the brink of extinction, basically, right? And that's the idea of privilege and domination. Take a look at the word of dominion again, right? That we have dominion over resources, over the animals and all that, right? I think that the interpretation of dominion has been perverted over to extreme, just like our economy sort of thing, right? To our technologies. There's good in these, in many of what our society has built. There's good in many of those things that we have built. But then there's that overextension of an overuse and the perversion of what's good to over-consuming. To return to sovereignty back to the Indigenous peoples that happens in our everyday conversations in our everyday lives, right? Whenever we come across a conversation about the economy or about the governments and the authorities and their laws, right? We gotta always, the church gotta take a part in questioning the narrative that's coming from the media, coming from Canada and the governments and our politicians, right? Look at all your systems, look at all your policies, in whatever circles you have, right? Do they line up with Indigenous laws, right? Of good stewardship, right? And equitable justice. Part of decolonizing is taking a look and understanding how much of a lie the economy really is. The economy is it's like how Christians talk about money is just a tool, right? Well, yeah, it is. It's a tool for lifting up one group of people and oppressing another group of people. That's what money's been used for, right?
We are also answering a call to be brave in an arena which requires a radical yet humble attitude towards reconciliation and a complete systemic overhaul. We also speak of recognizing and being aware of the space we hold and the privilege one might possess. Then strive in accommodating space for others, especially if one is non-Indigenous. This also applies to how we conduct ourselves in relationship to the world around us, which is now more than ever an imperative in the face of global warming. We talk about this idea of situational awareness in almost every discussion concerning reconciliation and privilege. Yet this call to reflection is yet to bear fruit in the mainstream all across Turtle Island, as it remains an individualistic issue, and the systems in which we work or work for go largely unscrutinized as topics become a "what can we do" opportunity for the very institutions that perpetuate many of these problems to one degree or another.
So I'm hearing, Johnny, is the issue is so big. A church, one single church, can only do so much. There's not much, like, there's little things we can do, but the biggest thing is to understand the big picture.
Yeah.
Is that yeah?
Yeah. Like I say, it's got to be a daily conversation. It's not. It can't be just a one-off thing. Do one little event or a workshop and stuff like that. It's got to be ingrained into your daily lives. It's got to be a lifelong thing. Yeah.
The church, this issue is so deep ingrained in the church. It's going to take a lot of, like you said, learning, repentance, and really just drawing closer to God's kingdom, not this world. And that's not an easy checklist thing to do, right? Yeah.
I often struggle with the possibility of not living long enough to even witness society's redemption and the return of my people's sovereignty over this continent. Perhaps more so now due to my work and oversensitivity to the underlying habits of an ego-capitalistic society. It's a struggle finding balance, living with symptoms of intergenerational trauma, PTSD, and sometimes even wondering if I've even the capacity to care about anyone or anything in real time. Yet there's always been one constant: Creator God and a strong desire for what's right and just. And when I think of Jesus, I'd also think of the selfless spirit of every activist who has been assassinated in the name of progress and our civilized comforts. It is in those truths where one should find a physical death is of little consequence.